In this week's episode of StudioInter, we'll be reviewing the two wins against Sassuolo and Cagliari. We'll be previewing the game against Napoli, an Inter rundown with Dutch football journalist and Inter fan Willem Haak. This week's Moggi, Moratti and Frog, and much, much more. Everything here on StudioInter, on SempreInter.com.
Lukaku! Tac 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 e gol di Stefan De Vrij!
Benvenuti, bentornati to another edition of StudioInter. I'm your host Nima Tavallaey, wishing you back to a week that Inter go into 11 points ahead of Milan in the Serie A after the 11th consecutive win in the Serie A, becoming the first team in history beating Arrigo Sacchi's Milan's record of winning 11 games, winning every single game since the season, since the table turned, so to speak, from match day 20 and onwards. Which is truly remarkable. The previous record was 10 that Arrigo Sacchi's Milan had and Inter had, but now it's only Inter. But before we get into everything, let me begin by introducing my panelist, the SempreInter.com preview writer, the artist formerly known as Mystic Mo, Mr. Mohamed Nassar.
No, I'm not giving up on Mystic Mo, man.
Right. No, you shouldn't. Yeah. No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't give up because, it's you really you're really the first. You really believed, and you were not. You really argued why Inter were going to win and that Inter were going to go on a run. You were one of the few people who actually had an idea as to why that would be as well. But let's before we get into all that, let me introduce our second panelist. He writes a weekly column, "What 5 things we learned from Inter this week" on SempreInter.com. Welcome back, Mr. Jake Smalley.
Thank you very much for having me. I've just been having a look, actually. The last time I was on the pod was just after the Fiorentina away victory, and Inter have won every single game since. So I'm hoping that now I'm back on the pod, that run can continue. I hope I don't break it. So
yeah. so if Inter start losing like 5-8 games now and lose the Scudetto, everyone knows it's Jake's fault for coming on the pod. And we're also joined by the chief news editor on SempreInter.com, Mr. William Beckman. How are you, Will?
I'm good. I'm freshly haircutted, so still alive again.
Yeah,
that, well, I mean, wins is
yeah. I mean, it's the first day that the UK opened after 4 months, I think, of lockdown.
Yeah,
so...
well, more or less, yeah, with a few sort of exceptions here and there. But, yeah.
Well, we are also joined by a very special guest, someone that I've had interactions with on Twitter, known on Twitter for a couple of years. He's a Dutch football journalist. He has his own podcast about Italian football in Dutch called Lo Stadio. He also works for Ziggo TV as a Ziggo Sport TV and Dutch TV, which broadcasts the Serie A, making his StudioInter debut, Mr. Willem Haak. Welcome.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're good to have you. I mean, first off, let's start there. You are, as I said in the introduction, you're an Inter fan, and that's how we got to know each other on Twitter. And I'm keen to know because, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, most Dutch people, for natural reasons, you are Milan fans because of the famous trio. So, what made you an Inter fan? I'm keen to ask you about that.
Yeah,
how did you become one?
It happened like 11 years ago, I think, when almost all of the Netherlands supported Barcelona in the Champions League, of course, in the semi-finals of the Champions League, because Barcelona plays that beautiful football and still plays that football. I mean, the Dutch style, and they like it here. But I like the underdog, and I watched those games, and Inter defended well. Inter won at San Siro, of course. You all know those games. You all can remember those games. And that's the year actually that I fell in love with Inter. But yeah, it was a beautiful year. And then the 11 years that I am an Interista were a bit more difficult.
Well, it's kind of funny you say that because myself and Mo, I mean, we became Interisti because we're a little bit older. We became Interisti in the 88-89 season, the Inter de Record. So it wasn't exactly a never-ending champagne of titles and celebrations and champagne since then. It took a little while, and I think that's good. That when they're, if people who become Interisti when they're younger, when Inter win, Inter teaches them life lessons afterwards.
Exactly. And then you realize that they don't win that often. So
No, exactly, and then you're happy when they actually do.
Exactly.
So
Like this year.
Exactly, like this year, and I'm glad you spoke about. This was not planned to bring Willem on because this ridiculous notion of beautiful football, because that's something we're going to talk about in this podcast. Because apparently Inter are boring because they win, if you ask me. But that's something else we're going to get to. So I'm keen to ask you because you and I spoke a little bit on WhatsApp and Twitter throughout this season, and I was very critical of Antonio Conte. I did not believe, especially after the Champions League exit and how it looked before Christmas, that Inter would be able to do anything. I mean, to challenge for a Scudetto, let alone go on a record-breaking 11-game win. Honestly now, Willem, what were your thoughts going into the season, and were you one of the doubters as well when the Champions League ended?
Yeah, it was for sure. I mean, last year was quite a good year, of course, with the second place and with the final in the Europa League. But then again, you expect them to win this year. You expect Conte to do those special things at Inter as well. And at the start of the season, it didn't look like they could win 11 games in a row, of course. I mean, you all can remember the games against Parma, against Torino, which were quite painful games as well. I mean, against Torino they won, but with so much pain and so much effort that I thought, well, what's the point of having Conte here, and what's the point of paying him so much and not winning, not doing those beautiful things? And of course, the knockout in the Champions League was, I think, the worst that could happen. And then I was the biggest doubter over here in the Netherlands, I think. I mean, as an Interista, you always criticize the coach, you always want them to win, and you always realize that it's not going to happen. But yeah, it is now. And I'm not the biggest fan still, but you have to be it right now. I mean, there's no reason to criticize Conte except for his interviews sometimes. But it's better now. It's better now.
Yeah, he does seem a bit more in harmony with life and found
It
his
is, yeah. And
something.
if you win, you're right. So that's there's no point of criticizing Inter right now, I think, especially when you're an Interista. I mean, winning is the most beautiful thing there is.
Yeah, absolutely. Mo, did you have a question for Willem?
Yeah, hi, Will. Very nice to have you on, especially from like another international Inter fan perspective. So I wanted to ask you, what for you? I mean, since you were attracted to Inter in the last winning cycle, what do you think of this team? Are we? What do we expect? I mean, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. The season isn't over, and 11 points is a big gap and everything. But assuming this season goes as well as we hope it does, and Inter do finish the league with a title finally, what do you think is the ceiling for this current Inter with Conte, and what does Inter need for the team to be able to do something outstanding, in your opinion, beyond just winning the title?
That's a good question, because the last years you see that there's a big gap between Italian football and the European top, I think. I mean, Juventus did well a couple of times, but the rest of the Italian teams weren't that good in the Champions League, of course. And you saw it this year with Inter. I mean, it was not good enough in the group stage. And I think there has to happen a lot to become a Champions League winning team. I think you have to have more of those warriors that Inter had in the squad of 2009, 2010, of course. And you need to have more depth in the squad, I think. I mean, to constantly win, to constantly be able to reach the knockout stage in the Champions League, you need like 20 good players, and I don't think that Inter has enough players to do that well in the Champions League. So you need a forward striker, you need an extra central midfielder, you need another central defender, which is not a type like Ranocchia or D'Ambrosio, but someone who can play even in the big games in Serie A. And that's, I think, what needs to happen the next couple of years to become a team that can beat squads like Bayern and Paris Saint-Germain. Because if you would ask me right now, and you do, then I think there's a big gap between Inter and those top European teams.
For sure. Jake, hand you over to Jake if you have a question for Willem.
Hi, nice to meet you, Willem, and chat properly. I just wanted to sort of tap into your expertise on Dutch football. During my columns over the last few weeks, I've been looking at sort of identifying some players that Inter might target in the window. We know that financially things might be a little bit difficult. We don't know what kind of budget we're talking about. But I've sort of identified the idea that perhaps Inter could do with some better quality in the left wing back slot, or maybe a central midfielder, even a centre back to add a bit of depth. Is there any players in the Eredivisie that you'd recommend that could do a job for Inter?
Yeah, of course. At Ajax plays Tagliafico, which is an Argentinian left back. But I think he could do the role at Inter as well, as a left wing back. And he's experienced, more experienced than, for example, Wijndal of AZ, who has quality but is still young and lacks experience at the Dutch top, because AZ is a good squad, but not like Ajax or PSV. And at central midfield, it's quite difficult, I think. I really like Koopmeiners of AZ, but then you see the same problem that he could come to Inter, but he costs 20-25 million. And I think that's too expensive for Inter buying a player who still has to prove everything at the real top and who hasn't played in the Champions League yet. But yeah, if you look at Ajax, there's a lot of players, I think, that could do well in Serie A and even at Inter, and are talented, of course.
I wanted to ask you because there's because I recently been studying this for in another situation, but there's a Swedish left wing back, Gabriel Gudmundsson, who's doing it really well at Groningen. And he's been linked to the top sides in Europe, and he's a left wing back. Have you seen him? Anything? What do you think of him?
Yeah, I've seen him, but I don't know him that well. But I think the same for him. That it would be better for him to go to a team like Ajax or PSV first, and then make the step to the European top. If you make a transfer from Groningen to Inter, we all know how difficult that can be for some players, and I don't think that he could do well at Inter right now. But maybe in a couple of years, maybe if you buy him now and send him to a team like Parma or whatever. To get some experience, that could be a transfer which is interesting for Inter.
For sure. William Beckman, would you like to ask Willem a question?
Yes, indeed. Thank you for joining us. I just wanted to ask you about this game that we saw yesterday against Cagliari, because there was one name that I wasn't expecting to see on the team sheet. I think we talked about it on last week's show. And that was Stefano Sensi, who has not started for Inter since the 30th of September, back when the world was completely different, and so were Inter as a team. So I just wanted to get your opinion on his performance, because I was personally pleasantly surprised. I mean, maybe I shouldn't have been, given because Sensi did play for Italy and score during the international break, but were you encouraged that maybe that he's not going to start games going forward, because we know that Barella was suspended for that match against Cagliari? But do you think that he could actually be? Do you think he still has a future for the rest of this season and also beyond? Because it would be a shame to never see the Sensi that we had last season again. But like I said, I thought he was reasonably encouraging in this match without getting carried away.
I expected to see Vecino because he's like more like a player of Barella's style, of course. But yeah, I was surprised by Sensi. I think he's more a type that can play in the position of Eriksen, of course, with his creativity, with his passing. But I really like the midfield with Eriksen, Brozovic, and Sensi, which is a passing midfield, and which is a passing midfield that you don't see that often in teams of Antonio Conte, because he really likes the physical style, of course. And but if you ask me, there's a future for sure for Sensi at Inter. More for him than for types like Vecino, Gagliardini, or Vidal, because he brings that creativity that we lacked in the games against Udinese, for example, which ended in 0-0, where you saw that Inter didn't have that last pass to send to Lukaku and Lautaro. Yeah, well, I liked him, but it's not a Sensi that we saw 1.5 season ago. I think we still have to wait for his best moments to come this season. But if you give him playing time, we will see those best moments again. I think that he could do well in the coming games. Maybe not for 90 minutes, but for 45, 60, maybe as a replacement of Eriksen. Yeah, that I could see doing him well then. Yeah.
I mean, we're gonna debate this ourselves even, but I wanted to hear your thought on this as well. This notion that, that all of a sudden after the game against Sassuolo, because Inter played with less ball possession and defended really deep, that all of a sudden Inter are now a boring team, and Inter play destructive football that's not gonna be successful in the Champions League, and that's why they failed in the Champions League. I'm keen to hear what you think about that.
It doesn't matter to me. I mean, if you win, you win. And we saw that with Juve the last 9 years. They didn't play that beautiful football either. And what Allegri said, I like to win I like to win. I like to win either with 20 points difference, or with 5 goals in a match, or with 1. Or with a cortomuso, it's important to win. And if you win, and we did it 11 times in a row now, there's no reason to complain. And you don't play football for the rest of the world. You play football for Inter. You play for this club, and not for Italian football. So of course there's a criticism, but that doesn't matter too much for me. If you win 1-0 against Cagliari, well, that's enough. You have the 3 points, and that's enough to become champions, I think. So I think that's a quality, and not a reason to criticize the squad or Conte or the club.
For sure. Just before we let you go, we've had a few questions, several listeners who've sent in questions, saying, because some of them you kind of already answered. For example, Mustafa Ali asks, how can Inter transfer this type of success in the Serie A to Champions League in order to succeed there next season? I mean, is it if we're talking transfers, obviously because of COVID, there's going to be limitations on that, severe limitations on that. But if you could dream within reason, who do you think? Can you give a list of players that you think that are realistic for Inter to sign in order to succeed in the Champions League next season better? And by succeed, I mean not win the Champions League, but to get to a quarter-final or something like that.
On top of that list is Rodrigo de Paul of Udinese, because I think he's the midfielder that Inter lacks right now. He has a dribble. He can bring those physical things the midfield lacks sometimes, and I think he could be a starting player. So if you have to pay 25 million for him, why not? And then an extra central defender, but I don't have a name that comes to mind right now, I think. But it's important to add some depth to the squad, because I think that the first 11 are good enough to do things in the Champions League, but you need those extra players. And some of those can play in the Serie A. For example, Pellegrini would be a midfielder that I would see doing well at Inter as well, of Roma. Yes, those players would be interesting to see at Inter, I think.
For sure. Well, before we let you go, I would like to, if you got something coming up, your pod or whatever, the floor is yours. Feel free to plug it.
No, thanks for having me. I mean, it's always different to speak in English and in Dutch, but thanks for having me. And we'll see each other at Piazza Duomo when we become champions, of course. Maybe next year.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd absolutely love that. Thank you so much for coming on, Willem.
Have a nice evening.
You too. Take care. Ciao.
Ciao.
Right. Let's continue there. Where about the boring Inter, because I find this so amusing, and I'm gonna ask. I want to know what you guys think, but I just personally think this stuff is absolutely hilarious because, I'm cursed. Some would say with a pretty good memory, and I remember when Antonio Conte won his first title with Juve, which started this this long 9-year run, and there was not a single person in Italy that accused Juventus of playing boring, that accused Conte of being boring, that accused Juve of being boring, that said anything like that. The only thing they said was praise Conte to take a team that finished 7th the year before and without any major big investments, minus Arturo Vidal and Andrea Pirlo on a free transfer and Mirko Vucinic and Lichtsteiner on a free as well. He transformed them to a side that did not lose a single game in the Serie A, and they won the Serie A in impressive fashion. That's what everyone was talking about. Now, Inter haven't won anything in a decade and haven't won the Serie A in 11 years. And as such, Inter are in the same position, in the way I see it, Inter should be judged in the same way that Juventus were when they started their winning cycle. But they're not, and we know why. And we know why these discussions appear, even though they're not backed up by the facts, even though yesterday we saw that Inter have the second most passes in the league before scoring a goal after Atalanta. Up until yesterday, Inter had scored the most goals in the Serie A, and now they've scored 69 second most goals. Of course, Inter are boring. If you have an anti-Inter agenda, you hate this Inter. You think it's boring. It's the most boring thing ever. If you don't like Inter, you love Inter when they have Kuzmanovic and Jonathan and Juan Jesus. You don't find this Inter you don't think Inter are entertaining when they have Christian Eriksen, Milan Skriniar, Alessandro Bastoni, or Barella or Lukaku. You think they're hilarious when Raja Nainggolan and Mauro Icardi and Ivan Perisic are fighting. That's entertainment. So, to me, this notion is just absolutely hilarious, and it always comes when Inter win. Like Massimo Moratti said, Inter aren't supposed to win. And when they do, they have to go on these ridiculous runs to win by a mile so that no one can catch them. So, it's childish. But I'm keen to hear what you guys think. I want to hear what you say, Mo, on this whole boring Inter thing.
Yeah, I think Willem said it best. I don't care. I really don't care, because I care about style of play when as it was when we went on that. I think it was a 7-match winning streak under Mancini, but it was all these when Handanovic was having that spectacular blinder of a season, saving all these goals, and Inter really weren't deserved winners. But in none of the matches, these quote unquote boring games, and none of the matches do you feel that Inter came out as undeserved winners. It was a very businessman-like performance, very professional, 90 minutes in and out. And I think we forget the fact that this is the second week in a row where Inter have a midweek match. So for me, like water off a duck's back. I don't care. I think this is like you just said, it's a salty narrative, and it is what it is. It's I really give it no attention. I could not care less. I could not care less.
But there's a thing here that really that I find so interesting, and that's the fact that and I wanted to hear what you all think about it, and I wanted to start with you, Will, about that, because I think personally, I never thought that Antonio Conte would be able to redefine how he understands the game and how and change. I thought he was very stuck in his ways because he's an ideologue, but the Inter that we've seen after Christmas is not the Inter we saw in the beginning of the season in terms of balance, in terms of how the midfield play. It's absolutely not the intensity team that his first Juve side had, or his Chelsea team. They play completely different. He's evolved, and at the heart of that lay a deeper balance defensively, but above all, a midfield which outruns its opponents, but doesn't just outrun them. With Barella, Eriksson, and Brozovic, you have creativity, intelligence, good shooting. You have players that can do it all. And that makes Inter unpredictable. And these 11 games show that, because even if they didn't have the ball, most of the ball position against Juve or Milan or Lazio, they kind of outplayed those teams, right? Or what am I missing here, Will?
No, you're not missing anything, I don't think. I remember when Conte turned up at Chelsea in 2016, his first press conference, he said that I think a coach is like a tailor who has to make the best dress, which is, find the dress that suits his team or fits his team the best. And that's kind of what he's done here. I'm sure he had an idea of how he wanted to play this season, but it didn't work. We saw that there was no balance. We conceded 13 goals in the first 8 league games, which is the same number of goals we then conceded in the next 20 league games, which really tells you how things have changed. I think the turning point was the defeat to Real Madrid, the one at home when we lost 2-0, when everything looked very, very bleak. Conte was facing calls to be sacked. I was one of those, as people may remember. And from that moment on, from the Sassuolo game, the first Sassuolo game at the Mappe Stadium, they had a chat, and this is what they've said anyway. We had a chat in the dressing room. We decided that we need to find a way to win games, because that's what we're here for. We're Inter, and Conte's found the right way to do it. He's dropped the team a little deeper. He's not conceding that central space that we were going on about in the first half of the season. He's got players who he had previously discarded to come back into the team, like Perisic and Eriksson. And, he has shown that, to an extent, he does adapt. I don't think anyone would dispute that he has his ideas and he likes to follow them. But, this isn't the first time that he's adapted to what he wants. Let's remember that at Juventus, he didn't turn up with the idea of playing 3-5-2. He wanted to play 4-2-4, which is what he's always been sort of in love with since his early coaching days. When we scored a goal against Sassuolo last week, and he put it on his Instagram talking about 4-2-4. So he's always adapted. At Chelsea, he had a back four, and which wasn't working, so he switched to a 3-4-3. So there's light and shade to all these things, and Conte has certainly shown that he is capable of analysing what's wrong and finding a solution. So yeah, I think he deserves huge credit. It's not the most spectacular style of play in the world, but we haven't won anything for 11 years, so we can't really be picky about how we play. And as you both said, most of us don't care anyway. So that's not a problem. What matters is that we've won 11 games, and unlike in that 2015-16 run that Mo alluded to, we've not won them by chance. We may have won, I think we've won 5 or 6 games now, but with a 1-goal margin, which obviously isn't always sustainable in the long run. But I don't think any of them have been particularly undeserved wins. Maybe some of them were tight games where we could have had a different result, but none of them have been, absolute robberies. There's always been a sense that we've got the game where we want it, and that we've been able to play the game on our own terms, which I think is probably, I've just been writing up some quotes from Walter Zenga for the site, and he was saying, people are confusing aesthetics with control, and the thing that Inter always have is that they control games. So while maybe they're not going to make their mark in history as a team that changed the way that football is played, it doesn't really matter. We are not in the position to be picky, even if we wanted to be, about the way this team plays. What matters is that Conte has found a way to put all the pieces in this puzzle together. He's convinced everybody, including those players who are not playing, such as Darmian and Ranocchia and Ambrosio and whoever else has come in the last few weeks, that this is something that they need to be a part of. And, if we go into Europe next season and things don't work out, then yes, we'll have the same discussion we've had before about how Conte needs to dominate the ball more in Europe. But that is a future discussion. Right now, there is only one thing that people should be focusing on. And it's the fact that we are walking to our first league title in 11 years. Now, I understand, as you said, people do have a slightly sharper tooth, we should say, with Inter compared to Juventus in the Italian league. There's also the fact that basically they can't hype up the title race anymore because we've killed it. So they have to find something else to talk about. And so the discussion has been thrown forward to, will this work in Europe? So I get it to an extent. But if we're talking about it as fans and as people that, don't need to look that far forward, it doesn't really matter at the moment, because winning the league is what he came to do, and it's what he's on course to do. So I don't think there's any scope for criticism at the moment.
But I mean, I'm really glad you brought that up about the 4-2-4, because I think that what's made it so interesting is the fact that Inter are very fluid. Andrea Pirlo speaks about that the formation on paper doesn't talk about, it doesn't matter, but what matters is how to get players in certain positions. Antonio Conte is doing that, because Inter, when he brings Brozovic and Christian Eriksen to drop us into central defense, and he sends Bastoni and Milan Skriniar as fullbacks, and he sends the wingbacks to become wingers with the two strikers up there, this is not, you said that it might not, might not change football forever. Well, it's rather unique. I've not seen many other teams play like that. That, together with his vertical football and the attributes that he has at his team in this team with Lautaro and above all Lukaku, that makes Inter a very difficult team, because they can hurt you in so many different ways. And I think that's what, his vertical football that he likes to talk about. This isn't some sort of, Mazzarri ball on steroids. It was before Christmas, when he had Vidal and Gagliardini starting, and he tried to shoehorn Eriksen into some sort of trequartista role that just confused him even more. That was awful. But what we're seeing now is something else, and it's all coming together. And I think if they would, like what Willem said, the only player and the only reason I want him is because Conte is here, because he has the tools that no one in this team has, and it would make Inter even more unpredictable, is Rodrigo de Paul, simply because of his brilliance with movement on the ball and ability to dribble. Because Inter don't dribble. We're the 19th team in the Serie A for dribbles per game and per player per game. Inter don't dribble. If they can also incorporate that into it, then it makes Inter virtually so unpredictable, because with Hakimi, Perisic, or whoever you have, together with these central defenders in the three-man defense, who are very good at going up on into fullback positions when we've got the ball, that makes Inter so unpredictable. And it's a very, I actually would say that it is a very rather revolutionary form of football that we've not seen before. Not like this. And it's genuinely incredibly interesting to see. Jake, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
I think one thing that you all of you have not really touched on too much is perhaps the way that Conte has maximised the capabilities of some of his key players. You mentioned Bastoni a little bit there. Bastoni, to me, when I'm looking around Europe, there's nobody quite like him as a player. The ability to play as a centre half, and also, like you just mentioned, come forward as almost like a fullback or a wing back in attack. He's got a brilliant array of passing. He's strong. He's fast. He's a bit of a freak, to be honest with you. There's no centre back, if you're going to fully sort of label him as one of those, quite like him. You've got him. You've got Barella, who's gone on another gear as the season's gone on. Lukaku. So I think one thing in terms of the squad is how he builds his system and the way that he plays around these key players. I think the one thing that then is added to that, that has sort of been mentioned brief there as well, with sort of Vidal and Gagliardini sort of taking a bit of a backseat. He's finally found sort of a starting 11 that fits what he wants. I think earlier in the season, when we were conceding goals, he had Kolarov playing games. I think it took him a little bit of time to sort of realise, look, I want to rest some players for some of the games, so I'll try and play some of the fringe players. But ultimately, the gap between the current starting 11, his strongest 11 that we talked about, in Perisic, Eriksen, the difference between that and as soon as you start adding players like Gagliardini in there, maybe even Ashley Young at some points, although he has had some good games, it's not quite the same level of quality. And I think maybe it might be a bit of a question going forward for next season, like Will sort of alluded to, whether you can keep this 11 going all the time in Europe and then play them in the league. It's not going to happen. So I think going forward, it's perhaps going to be important this summer to recruit quite well, add a bit of extra quality. Rodrigo would probably be an amazing signing. That'd be absolutely superb. And I think Stefano Sensi was a player that was sort of shoehorned for that role, but we can't sort of rely on the fact that he can stay fit, and that's a bit of a problem. But I think as the season's sort of gone on, to me, it seems like Conte's evolved, like you mentioned, in terms of tactically. He's more happy to let the opposition have the ball. The counter-attack's massively strong, and that's down to the fact that he can rely on those key individuals, Lukaku, Barella, even Brozovic at times, Bastoni, and also he's settled on this starting 11 that he's been able to use, where Inter's best team is out, and playing maybe once, twice a week in just the league does maybe allow that a little bit more. So I think that's where things have really, really turned around. I think as well, you've got to pinpoint that Juventus game as well. It was a massive, massive victory. I think even more so than the wins over Lazio and Milan, to be honest with you. I think getting one over on Juventus, the current holders at home, so convincingly gave the players such a massive, massive lift in confidence. And truly, I don't think they've ever looked back from even that point.
Yeah, that certainly turned out to be true. There's no doubt about that. But it's all excellent points. We've had a couple of questions from listeners, and I don't want to use them all today because a lot of them also are about the future, and I don't want to entirely jinx it. Although I know that we're going to win the Scudetto, but I don't want to start going any events. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves too much. But there are some reports about, if we were to dream within reason, as I said, I have 3 players that I absolutely would want Inter to sign this summer. I have 3. These are my 3 targets. Crotone's Simi as a backup to Lukaku. Federico Di Marco as a left wing back to alternate with Perisic or whoever plays there next to him, preferably Perisic. I think for one more season he's got in him. And Rodrigo de Paul. These are my 3 players. I'm not saying you have to name 3, but name however many, or 1 or 2 or 3, however you want, that you could, if you could dream within reason. Starting with you, Mo.
Yeah, I think the consensus on De Paul is quite clear. I think like you and Willem said, this is the time with Conte here. This is the time for this player to express himself the best. Inter need a player of his caliber and attributes. So I definitely think De Paul. I definitely think we should re-sign Di Marco for sure. So yes, I agree with that. We do need a backup to Lukaku. Who it would be, who it could be, I don't know. I was really, really happy and enthusiastic about the Giroud, even though I'd spent my entire life shitting on him. But I think, honestly, as a vice Lukaku, I think he's still got a couple of years in him to come off the bench and do interesting things. Although we keep seeing Esposito scoring goals for Venezia, I think it is. So maybe, who knows? But we definitely do need a proper vice Lukaku, and I think that would be pretty solid. We're gonna need the right backup, not just Darmian, but someone with the attacking attributes of Hakimi, so that in case Hakimi is unfit, out of form, or suspended, Conte doesn't need to rejig his entire attacking formation. So I know that Hakimi is a very talented player, and finding someone who can capably fill his role is not easy. But yeah, no, I think by and large that would be it. I don't think I disagree with Willem here in that I don't think the defense needs any shoring up. I think we have the best center back not pairing, it's a trio, but center back module, and I think I can't believe I'm saying this, but Ranocchia and D'Ambrosio are both capable stopgaps. Maybe if we have an extended layoff by one of the main guys, maybe then the defense would be a little bit more exposed. But I don't think it's the priority where we need to fill. I think vice Lukaku, left wing back cover, and central mid, like we've always said, someone to replace, to add balance to the side and take the pressure off Brozovic. That would be it for me.
Will, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, we all know the positions that really need the urgent reinforcement. Perisic has done a great job at left wing back, but I think a left-footed specialist, a twin to Achraf Hakimi on the left wing would be ideal. Obviously, Ashley Young is going to leave by all accounts, so we will need a replacement numerically there more than anything else. Di Marco obviously would be ideal. We are not going to have swathes of money to spend by any stretch of the imagination. So if a gentleman's agreement could be arranged with Hellas Verona to bring him back, that would be great. He wouldn't mind coming in as a backup, I'm sure, if we wanted to keep faith with Perisic, which I'm not necessarily against, but we will need a reinforcement there. And if you're looking for a left foot, then he's got a great left foot. Needs some work defensively from what I've seen, but that can be learned. We've already seen the progress that Hakimi's made under Conte in that sense. The other one is the Lukaku backup, as you say. We are going to be, again, we'll have 3 games a week in the Champions League next season, and it's really asking a lot to ask Lukaku and Lautaro as well to have a third season where you're really pretty much relying on them with the occasional start for Sanchez. So someone who will be an option in the way that Pinamonti clearly hasn't been is necessary. Giroud, as I think I said that in January, would be a good idea, although he is getting a bit older, and we know that we signed a couple of 30-something-year-olds last year, and that didn't necessarily go very well. Muriel has been linked, but I don't see how Atalanta are gonna let him leave. He would be great. He's good as a sub, and he's good whenever he starts. Andrea Bellotti is out of contract next summer, so he will not be costing too much. I don't think Torino are going to get relegated now, but that's another name that we've been linked to who might be interested potentially. So that it's a difficult role there, because you've basically got to sell the fact that you're going to come and sit on the bench, which is really why we ended up with Pinamonti in the first place, along with the fact that we didn't have much money. So it's not an easy one to get right. De Paul would be great in midfield, and then Samir Handanovic has been great, but there's another Udinese player we should hopefully be looking at, and that's Musso. Although again, money is going to talk there. Looks like we need 30 million for that. So, it's hard really to get carried away with names, given that we know that this is going to be another difficult market for Inter and for other clubs. So I don't know how many of those are really very realistic. Probably not many of them. I did have one other name though that I just remembered I thought about a few weeks ago, and someone who I thought would be ideal for Conte, although admittedly he'd need to adapt to the league potentially. Saul Niguez is not playing at Atletico Madrid, and he would be, I know maybe he's not quite got the reputation he had a couple of years ago. He's kind of been usurped by Llorente in that midfield, but I think whenever I used to see him, I think he'd be perfect for the way that we play. We need I think Aldo Serena said last week, we need another Barella, because that kind of goal-scoring midfielder, because you said Eriksen has not really managed to contribute yet with goals. He's always a name that I'd love to see, but if we talk, that's more of a dream than a piece of advice for Moratti and Alzio, because I don't think the money is going to be there.
No, for sure. What about you, Jake?
These questions are really tough because it gets my football manager part of my brain sort of twigging, and I get this idea between players I really like and players that become a bit more logical. I think, given the points that have been raised, I think financially it makes sense to try and get a deal for DiMarco done. I really like DiMarco. I think he's excellent. I think he's used to playing a similar sort of system. Perhaps he does need a little bit of work defensive, but going forward, he's also quite good at set pieces as well. I think he'd definitely be an upgrade on Ashley Young. So to have him and Perisic as option that left wing back role would be good. Robin Gosens is a player that has been potentially talked about, but that might be a bit financially out of Inter's reach, because he'd be the dream really. He'd be the Hakimi style sort of play on the other side. I like your idea of Simi. Nima, I think he'd be a pretty decent signing for a backup striker. I think he's very physical. He's quite strong at leading the line. He's not a slouch either, really. And I think he's someone who would quite potentially be quite happy to sign for Inter and maybe have a bit part role, to convince him to come from a team that, are going to get relegated this season, to come play Inter and potentially play the Champions League would be massive. I think there's a few teams that would look at him. I don't think he'd cost the earth, but the fact that he could possibly get Champions League football playing for Inter, if injuries happened or, just to come off from the bench, I think that would be a good signing. One that I sort of wanted to throw into the mix might be a little bit unlikely, but I was reading today about potential for Papu Gomez to come in. I think that would be
I'm
quite
really glad you brought that up because that was my next question, because we have a listener question who wants us to talk about that, because the issue is there's rumors about João Mario Papu Gomez swap, and my response to that is, where do we sign? Like, João Mario is not even he's not even remotely on Inter's radar. Yeah, I'd bring him in.
Yeah, well, I think in terms of money as well, the figures that were being quoted are very similar. So, I mean, it sounds like from what I was reading that Papu's quite interesting coming back to Italy, and obviously Sevilla only paid 8 million for him. So if you get 7 or 8 million for João Mario, or even if you just do a straight swap, I mean, literally that's been an absolute bargain. And that if you look at those players I've just mentioned, I think you'd be looking at less than 10 million for Simi. You'd probably be looking at less than 10 million for Di Marco if there's some sort of deal to be done there. And same again for Gomez. You could do your summer recruitment. I know this is very ideal, but for less than 30 million there in terms of three really good players that will improve the side. And like I've just mentioned in previous point, I think all those players as well, I'd be quite confident in relying on to come into the team for games at the weekend, Benevento at home, Spezia, games like that, and also to come on and make a difference as well. So they'd be my three picks. And I love the idea of Gomez just because, well, he's a beautiful player.
It's Papu. I mean,
Beautiful
you can
footballer.
play 3-4-2-1. You can play 3-5-1-1. I mean, just having him would open up. I mean, you'd play a different kind of game, and given how much he drops deep to pick up the ball and move with it, it would just be phenomenal. But yeah, so shout out to Mustafa Ali and Ahmed Khaled. We've got lots of other questions. We're going to have a episode where we answer your questions more in, because a lot of them, towards the end of the season. So thank you. So keep them coming. I got them all saved up. Right. Let's. I mean, the Cagliari game. I think we've covered most of it. Really, I think that Cagliari, where Inter did well. This was a game that was a bit of a trap game the way it played out, because Inter kept possession, Inter created, but Cagliari defended really well. And in the end, God bless him, Matteo Darmian, almost Scudetto, the guy who was, when he signed for Inter, not a single fan was there to greet him. Is he's turning out to be one of the most useful players, and scoring important goals, and always playing in where he needs to play, and being a real squad player. So God bless Matteo. But other than that, I've not really got much to say. But other than what I really want to talk about is the upcoming game against Napoli. It is the two most informed teams in the Serie A who face off together at the Stadio Diego Maradona in Naples. And this is where I expect fireworks from this game, because Napoli have to attack and they have to win in order to qualify for the Champions League. Inter not so much. And we know that when Inter play against teams that like to go after them, Inter usually do really well, and Inter have a week to prepare. But having said that, Napoli's attack is not, with all due respect to Sassuolo, it's not Sassuolo's attack. This is a really good attack. And if I can recommend all the listeners and you guys something to do, if you haven't seen Napoli's first goal against Sampdoria, go and look at it. It is gorgeous. That's attacking football. It is an absolute joy to watch. So Fabian Ruiz scored, and the passing and the interchanging and the movement is just absolutely glorious. So Inter will need to watch out. Mo, are you still Mr. Positivity? Do you really think this run can continue beyond next Sunday? Because I think this has got 2-2 draw, exciting, spettacolo written all over it.
Yeah, I've been mulling it over in my head where to go with this prediction. So I think the smart money would say predict Inter to finally drop points here, but at the same time, like I said, this Inter has shown us that they're able to do what we expect them to do. And I think you say Napoli is the second most informed team. I haven't looked at the numbers or the statistics, but they did just, quite easily lose to Juventus. Not last week, but in their makeup game when we played against Sassuolo that night or that evening. So I don't know. They're very temperamental, and Inter seem to be anything but temperamental. I'm going to predict a cheeky, sneaky win. I think maybe a nice 2-1, where Inter go 2-0 up, and then Napoli claw on back, and then it's a bit of a frantic ending to the game. But I think it's the train moves on to stop number 12.
Wow. Will, where are you on this?
I believe that. I mean, I've said this 2 or 3 times in the last few pods, so maybe I should stop. But I do think that this is possibly the most difficult game that we have left, especially if you consider that, without wanting to jinx anything, it might be that the Roma and Juventus games are games we play with the league already in the bag. So this is, if there's going to be any chink in the armor to be exposed, it's going to be exposed in this game. And I think it will probably be a draw. And that would be an absolutely acceptable result for us, given the position we're in. I don't expect fireworks, though, and I can remind you of exactly this conversation we had 4 months ago before the home game, when you said it would be a festival of football, and it turned out to be a dud because Conte and Gattuso both wanted to sit back. Now, I understand that Napoli need
It's
to
a
win
different
because
situation
it's
now.
League game. I know, but I still don't think that's going to change the way that Gattuso approaches this game, because he has never attacked Inter in 5 or 6 games where he's played against us. 2 Coppa Italia matches, 3 or 4 derbies. He respects us perhaps even more than he should. He will understand that if he lets us play on the break, he's going to be in trouble. So I still think he's going to be cautious. I don't think Inter are going to go all out. So I expect maybe slightly better than last December, when it was a 0-0 game that was broken by a penalty, essentially, and a red card with 20 minutes left. So I think it'll be a fairly tactical, maybe enjoyable, but mostly tactical 1-1 draw. And that'll be fine for me. Barella's back. Lukaku is not suspended, so
we have no suspensions. If I'm not wrong, we have a full team now.
Yeah, it's the only one that's left to serve his suspension. Really, is of the first team is Lukaku, who's now still a booking away, but he's not missing this match. So we have Lautaro on 3. So if he picks up 2 bookings, then he could get one. But yeah, that sort of yellow card thing we appear to have got through that without even dropping any points. So that's definitely a positive.
What about you, Jake?
I think this one's quite a tough one to predict. I think there's some good points that have been made about Napoli needing to win this a little bit more than Inter. So I could see Inter potentially dropping points in this one. I think a draw is probably the most likely outcome from the game. But I think it'll be really interesting to watch. I think this idea of Gattuso setting up quite sort of solid against Inter is definitely something that we can sort of bear in mind, because I think if you look at the Coppa Italia game at the back end of last season, I remember watching that at the time and thinking, Napoli are just going to paste into, really high energy, sort of attacking football. And if anything, Inter should have won that game. So it's really hard to predict. Everybody sort of looks at Napoli one day and think, they play this brilliant attacking style of football. All these attacking players they've got options. The football they play is outstanding, and then they'll turn up one week and they'll just be rubbish. And I don't know whether they get some sort of stage fright or whether he decides to tinker with things a little bit too much. I won't put it past Inter going there and winning it all. I just don't have that 100% positive DNA of Mystic Mo. I just can't 100% fully back myself to say that they'll definitely win. I think it'll be a draw, but I won't put it past Inter nicking a 1-0 or something. I just think mentality-wise, they're a bit stronger than Napoli. So if anyone's going to win, I'd say Inter, but my head says a draw, 1-1.
You see, the reason why I don't think that is because Atalanta and Juve play that day. And regardless of the result in that game, if Atalanta win, Juve and Napoli has to win in order to equal Juve on 62 points. If Juve win, then Napoli has to win, because then they go past Atalanta in the table. If they both draw, Then again, Napoli win, they go on 62 points, equal points with Atalanta. This is why I think this is what speaks for us, the table, that no matter what that result is, given that Atalanta play Juve earlier that day, Napoli have to win this game, and they know it. And Gattuso is kind of playing for his job here. His job kind of depends on this. So I think that's why I think that he's going to attack, and I think that his attack is good enough to score goals. I don't see us. There's not going to be a 13th clean sheet. I see a very exciting game here. I think a 2-2 draw is where it is because of all that.
Yeah, Lozano is suspended. I should just say he picks up.
But Politano's definitely going to score, isn't he? I mean, it's it would be typical, wouldn't it? But no, but I think 2-2. I think Lukaku, Lautaro. I think Politano and Insigne. I think it's going to be a pretty good game because I think Gattuso. Everything you said, I agree with, but this is different. He's playing for his job. He has to get that because he can really put pressure on those teams.
I think his job is already decided from what we've been reading. I don't think there's any chance he stays.
No, but I mean, I've heard Di Marzio say something similar about that as well. But I think it'll be very difficult if he gets into the Champions League final to, like, politically, to just tell him to do what.
Well, the relationship doesn't seem to be great, but we'll see. If they get fourth, then he'll have a decision to make. Certainly, De Laurentiis.
For sure, and yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, it's gonna be a really exciting game, and we'll be doing a pod on the Monday, so we won't be previewing the Spezia and Hellas games. We'll do that next week. Now's the time, the part of the show where we pay tribute, rip the piss out of, and criticize someone or something heavily in the world of football. Starting with the positivity, which will be presented by Mr. Positivity. This week's Moratti, which is presented by Mr. Mohamed Nas.
He works a lot, he's intelligent, and he surprises people sometimes with his ideas. Not easy to find one person of these qualities.
Yeah, so last week it was Ashley Young, unlikely Moratti. This week, equally unlikely, but much more obvious, Matteo Darmian. You alluded to him being uomo di Scudetto. So yeah, of course, this guy comes up with a Danilo D'Ambrosio-esque goal to clinch the 3 points. I think more importantly than these, like what I was talking about last week with Ashley Young and now Matteo Darmian, possibly more importantly than the individual action or performance, is the fact that we have a squad full of players who are playing for a common goal and when called upon, give their all for the entire duration of the match. So I salute his spirit. I salute every player's spirit who has contributed to this amazing run. So yeah, Matteo, you're my Moratti.
Nice one. Let's move on to something much more comical. This week's Frog, which will be presented by Mr. William Beckman.
È clamoroso! Autogol di Ranocchia!
Yeah. Looks like we're going to win the Scudetto, which is obviously lovely, which means that AC Milan are forced to settle for a place in the Champions League in the best case scenario. This week's Frog is Stefano Pioli. You may have seen this, for having the cheek in his pre-match press conference on Friday to say, and I quote, "We never talked about the Scudetto. It was you, media, who did." So, we'll put this to the test. Here we go. What have we got here? Ibrahimovic is doing a good thing by talking about the Scudetto. Let's try and win them all. That was Pioli. Paolo Maldini, Milan are dreaming about the Scudetto, and we don't want to stop doing that. Simon Kjaer, we believe in winning the Scudetto. Pioli, Scudetto, well, it's right. It's definitely good that we believe in that. Diogo Dallo, if we win the last 10 games, we'll win the Scudetto. Fikayo Tomori, we must believe in the Scudetto until the end. Kjaer again, we must believe in the Scudetto. Franchesi, Milan believe that they can win the Scudetto. Brahim Diaz, the Scudetto is the only remaining objective. We must try and win until the end. Hauges, the Scudetto is possible. We'll see in a couple of weeks. Ibrahimovic, we didn't deserve to go out of the Coppa Italia. Now let's focus on winning the Scudetto. Donnarumma, we can fight for the Scudetto. Mandzukic, the Scudetto is possible. Mate, who'd only been there 10 minutes. I'm here to win the Scudetto. And Calabria, we believe in the Scudetto. We must not be afraid. So at what point in that list of quotes did Milan not talk about the Scudetto this season? I don't think the media were telling them to say that. I mean, look, it's fine to talk about it. I don't see why he has to pretend he's never spoken about it. Of course, you shouldn't rule it out when you're top, but
I think
don't say that we
everyone
never
except
spoke
the
about it.
groundsman and the guy who makes the coffee at Milanello have spoken about the Scudetto by the
We
sound.
spoke about Milan winning the Scudetto. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone did.
Oh, dear, that was lovely. That was absolutely brilliant.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Let's move on to something much more negative. This week's Moggi, which is presented by Mr. Jake Smalley.
Giving me a really hard job there because I've just stopped laughing, and that's going to be something that's pretty hard to follow. But I just wanted to keep it sort of a bit of an Italian note, a Serie A note. I wanted to sort of focus on our opponents from Sunday, Cagliari. I think this season's been quite an interesting sort of relegation battle, and I was sort of trying to wrap my brains to find a squad or sort of maybe even a starting lineup that's as strong as Cagliari's on paper in the past decade that's found themselves in the position that they're in. I mean, if we talk about the 90s, we talk about Effenberg, Battistuta level, Fiorentina getting relegated. But for me, this is probably the best team on paper, start 11-wise, in terms of experience and quality of players that could end up getting relegated from the Italian top flight. So Cagliari as a club for me are the Moggi of the week because they've just really, really disappointed me, maybe a little bit angry. I really like the manager as well, Semplici. I think the job that he did at Spal was really, really good. He sort of galvanised them really well. And I don't want his managerial career to sort of to suffer in a bit of a way because I quite like him. So Cagliari this week are the biggest villains for me because they've just really disappointed me, maybe angry.
No, agreed, and it's all down to Tommaso to Giulini, the president, who gave Eusebio Di Francesco was it 2.5 years? How many years was it contract extension? Well,
I don't remember. It was
because I remember you talked about a couple of it was like a year and a half, 2 years. Yeah, he was the frog because they gave him a 2.5 year or something like that extension and then sacked him 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
It's like that's a playwright of the Moratti crazy years playbook.
He always picks Giulini the best way to get relegated. Remember when Cagliari got relegated 6 years ago? He appointed Zeman that year.
I remember
He was no longer a coach by that point.
But he still managed to beat Inter and Mazzarri 4-1. And Albin Ekdal scored a hat-trick of all the bloody people in the world. Of course, he hasn't scored his only... Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. If you look at his career, that guy never scores. 5 goals he scored against Inter. Between Siena and Cagliari and everywhere else he's been. It's just and obviously he's a Milan fan, so So
can we celebrate the end of, speaking of sort of banter era, Inter? We beat Sassuolo on Wednesday at home. We hadn't done that since the 7-0 in 2014.
Yeah. And we've beaten them home and away.
30% possession, my backside. Who cares? That's what you have to do to beat Sassuolo if you're called Inter.
I mean, the 30% is just so. It's what you do with the ball. How dangerous were Sassuolo? Apart from the last 15 minutes, they had nothing. And
they scored when we were down to 10 men.
Yeah, precisely. There you go. Right, that's all we had time for. I'd like to thank Willem for coming on, Willem Haak. Go check him out on Twitter. And also, if you speak Dutch, check out Lo Stadio. It's a podcast. I'd like to thank you, Jake. Thanks for coming on.
No, thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed joining you boys again and having a good chat about Inter. And like I said before, I hope I'm not going to jinx the club, and I hope next time I'm on that we can be talking, even more in depth about the ribbons going on that trophy. So yeah, thanks for having me again.
For sure. Love what you just said. And Mr. Mohamed Nassar.
Always a pleasure. And from the only guy who predicted 6 points last week, I really think that we'll hopefully be able to make it 12 points in a row. And I can't look forward to enough to talking about those ribbons on that trophy. So yeah.
Amen. Mr. William Beckman.
Thank you. Remember, Milan never spoke about the Scudetto, and we'll see you next week for more fake news.
Until next week, I'm your host, Nima Tavallaey, wishing you to stay safe, listen to your authorities. If you're out of lockdown, be careful, take care of yourselves. 3 points, and sempre e solo forza Inter.